Good afternoon or morning. Welcome everyone to an inaugural presentation brought to you by the Chicago Deaf Psychology Circle on a brief timeline of Jung, Freud, and analytical psychology. We begin our timeline with Carl Jung as a young psychiatrist working alongside Eugene Bloyer on the association test. During this period, Jung became deeply familiar with patients suffering from paranoia, manic depressive insanity, and psychogenic disturbances. He began to connect these cases with the theories he encountered in the works of Joseph Breuer, Pierre Janet, and Sigmund Freud. In the early 1900s, Jung read Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, which introduced Freud's understanding of schizophrenic forms of expression. And by 1903, Jung revisited the text and further explored the application of repression within the psychology of neurosis. Through his work with patients, Jung observed that they would react strongly or slowly when associations touched upon what he described as psychic lesions. Some reactions were unconscious or artificially expressed. Jung used Freud's concept of repression to support his observations. However, he began to diverge from Freud, especially concerning the content of repression. While Freud emphasized sexual repression, Jung saw other factors such as social adaptation, life tragedies, and issues related to personal prestige as more relevant in his patient's case. At one point, Jung regarded Freud's interpretation of dreams as an epoch-making work. He saw it as a bold attempt to empirically understand unconscious elements, even if he didn't entirely agree with Freud's conclusions. Jung would later write his own book on dementia praecox, which would bring him to Vienna, where he met Freud. Their conversation lasted 13 hours, almost virtually without pause. It was here that Jung began to see how much of Freud was fixated on the sexual theory of repression. Freud, however, attributed Jung's views to be a lack of experience, and at the time, Jung didn't feel confident enough to argue his point, but already sensed that the issues people faced, such as, again, social adaptation, traumatic life events, and problems with self-worth, were more complex than simply sexual repression. Freud, on the other hand, believed that most psychological issues could be boiled down to sexual repression or psychosexual causes. Freud even went as far as to say, "My dear Jung, you must not abandon the sexual theory and work towards an unshakable bulwark against the black tide of occultism." Jung, however, thought Freud's sexual theory was just as occult as occultism itself, in the sense that neither had enough empirical evidence to support them at the time. In 1909, during a conversation in Vienna, they discussed parapsychology, a field Freud had not seriously considered at that point. However, both men experienced an unusual event. Jung felt a strong tension in his diaphragm, which culminated in a loud bang from a nearby drawer. Jung described this as a catalytic exteriorization phenomenon and even predicted it would happen again, which it did. Freud, startled and aghast, grew mistrustful of Jung's interpretations, and they never discussed the experience again. Jung's growing divergence from Freud culminated in their split during a trip to the US in Massachusetts. While sharing dreams for interpretation, Freud told Jung that he could not discuss his personal life, fearing it might undermine his authority. This moment crystallized Jung's realization. Freud viewed his own interpretations not as one possibility among many, but as absolute truths. This departure pushed Jung to find his own path. He began exploring typology, delving into the history of occultism, myth, and alchemy to interpret his own dreams. Jung found that his dreams seemed to resonate with the texts he studied. He saw these texts and ancient mythology as crucial to understanding the unconscious and the way it developed. In time, Jung identified recurring symbols and patterns, which he came to call archetypes, as fundamental to the collective unconscious. Jung's fascination with mythology deepened as he analyzed mythological figures as though they were his patients. he explored the psychology of ancient cultures and primitive psychology, seeing their myths as reflections of universal unconscious processes. One case, the fantasies of a patient named Miss Miller, mirrored Jung's own research into mythology and was instrumental in the development of his book, Psychology of the Unconscious. In his writing, Jung has mentioned that Freud, by evaluating dreams as the most important source of information concerning unconscious processes, he gave back to mankind a tool that had seemed irretrievably lost. He demonstrated empirically the presence of an unconscious psyche which had hitherto only existed as a philosophical postulate. It may as well be said that the contemporary cultural consciousness has not yet absorbed into its general philosophy the idea of the unconscious and all that it means, despite the fact that modern man has been confronted with this idea for more than half a century. The assimilation of the fundamental insight that psychic life has two poles still remains a task for the future. These developments marked just the beginning of Jung's deep dive into the unconscious, laying the groundwork for many of his future contributions. As Carl Jung developed his theory of the collective unconscious, he began to explore the archetypes, universal categories of experience that shape our inner lives. These archetypes, he believed, were deeply embedded in the unconscious and manifested in various ways. Among the most notable of these figures were the shadow, the anima, or the inner feminine in men, the animus, the inner masculine in women, and the self. Jung's insights into these archetypes were deepened through his exploration of dreams and a technique he developed called active imagination. By engaging with these figures through dreams, Jung can track their evolution and role in the psyche over time. As he worked with the dreams of others, he formulated the concept of individuation, or the process of psychological growth and self-realization. Individuation, Jung suggested, could be traced through the patterns of development that appeared in dreams, and over the years, his work with thousands of dreams became a cornerstone of dream analysis. Through these analyses, Jung observed profound personal transformation in those who worked with their unconscious mind, laying the groundwork for modern practices in psychotherapy and our understanding of the unconscious mind. Jung was not alone in his exploration of the unconscious. Over time, he was supported by a group of pioneering Jungian scholars who contributed significantly to the field. Among them were Marie-Louise von Franz, who explored the deep connections between alchemy, dreams, symbols, and fairy tales; James Hillman, known for his work on archetypal psychology, emphasizing the role of imagination and myth in understanding the psyche; Barbara Hanna, who focused on the animus, the archetypal symbolism of animals, and her notable work with the encounters with the soul; Edward Edinger, who examined symbolic meaning in religious texts and its relation to inner transformation; and Marian Woodman, whose work centered on feminine psychology, particularly the relationship between psyche and soma, or the body. These thinkers, each building on Jung's foundation, expanded and enriched the understanding of the unconscious and its influence on personal and collective development. Jung's influence continues to resonate in modern and contemporary therapeutic practices. His work has left a lasting impact on various fields, including art, play, and expressive therapies, where creative expression is used to explore the unconscious and facilitate healing; trauma-informed approaches, which integrate Jungian concepts like the shadow and inner child to help individuals process past wounds; narrative and myth-based approaches, which draw on Jung's ideas of archetypes and personal myths to understand and reshape one's life story; the exploration of personality dynamics, including the introvert and extrovert types, as well as techniques like dream work to unlock deeper layers of the psyche. These modern methods continue to evolve Jung's original insights, using them to address the complexities of human experience in today's world.